Hello Year 12s and welcome to Lesson 3. Today we're going to talk about melody writing. What I'm going to do in this lesson is talk you through the composition that I've started today. So we're going to go through the way that I chose my chord progression and then how I went about choosing notes for my melody. I decided I was going to write in G minor, so I wrote out G minor scale. I went with G natural minor because that's what I was feeling. To be a bit like Sting, I decided to put in some secondary dominants. After a bit of trial and error, I decided on the chord progression of G minor, C, G minor, C, D minor, B flat, F, A. When it comes to choosing notes in your melody, if you stick with the notes that are in the accompanying chord for the strong beats, you know that those notes are always going to work. So if we're in 4/4, beats 1 and 3 have those strong beats. If we're in 3/4, 3 has the strong beat. So my first chord is G minor. It has G, B flat and D. So I would need to use those notes on my strong beats to make sure that my melody would work with it. So beats 1 and 3, because I'm going to make my composition in 4/4, would I either have a G, a B flat or a D. For my C chord, I've got the notes C, E and G, so my melody would have C, E or G on beats 1 and 3. Then we have G minor again, C, D minor. My notes are D, F, A, so my melody on the strong beats would be D, F or A. B flat, D and F, so my melody on beats 1 and 3 would have a B flat, D or an F. And then F major has an F, A, C, so my melody would have on the strong beats F, A or C. And then my last chord, A major, which I'm really loving in this context, has A, C sharp, E, so my melody on my strong beats, beats 1 and 3, would have an A, a C sharp, or an E. Okay, I'm going to write a melody and make sure that I follow those rules, see what it sounds like. I'm going to write my first 4-bar phrase. G minor, C, G minor, C. Okay, and for the purposes of just showing you where the notes of each chord fall, I'm not going to use a key signature. But obviously, if I was doing my composition and writing it up nicely, I would definitely have a key signature. But I'm going to have my time signature of 4/4. So this is my melody. As you can see here, I've got beats 1 and beat 3, both playing notes of my G minor chord. I'm just going to highlight the notes that fall on these beats so you can see how it all works out. And C is obviously part of my C chord, and so is E. Now, something also to note is that if you've got the beat divided into smaller rhythms, you don't actually have to make every single rhythm that falls on that beat part of the chord. So this one's only a semi-quaver, but that's good enough for me for now. Now my G minor, I really like things to be quite balanced, so I like my third bar to be quite similar to my first bar. That's why it actually starts with the same first two notes. B flat's part of my G minor chord, and so is D. And look how similar my third bar is to my first bar. You don't have to do this, it's just my personal preference. And then, because I want it to be simple, I'm just going to have a G as a 4-beat note in my very last bar. Let's hear what it sounds like. So here's the first 4 bars of my melody. Something that I like to do is not always use the tonic of each chord in my melody. So the tonic in G minor is G. So using the tonic in the melody has a really grounded feeling, but sometimes I think that it can sound a little bit unrefined. So I really like using the third of the chord, so G, B flat. And that's why I chose the third to be my first note of my melody, because I think it brings a delicacy and also it's a little bit intriguing. The 5th of the chord, the top note, G, B flat, D, also sounds quite intriguing as well, and still a little bit more grounded than the B flat, the 3rd. Another thing that we can do to make our composition sound a little bit more sophisticated is by using suspensions. So a suspension is usually a note, one note above or below a note that's part of the chord that's heard on a strong beat. So instead of, my next chord is a D minor. So a suspension in the case of D minor is one note higher or one note lower than one of these chords. So I'm going to play one of these notes. So I've got a D, an F, or an A. I'm going to play a B flat. So it's one note away from the A, and it sounds like it doesn't really belong, but it resolves really nicely to the A, which is part of the chord. So I'll play it down the octave as well. And suspensions really draw in your listener because the listener wants that feeling of resolution. So I'm going to, in my next 4 bars, use some suspensions to add a little bit of tension into my composition. Now I'm going to write the second half of my melody. I'm going to have my suspension right here at the beginning of bar 5 because it's the middle of the 8-bar melody and I want to have a bit of tension and release here. So I'm going to start with my B flat, which is obviously not part of my D minor chord, D, F, A, and I'm going to highlight the suspension in pink so we can see the difference between it and the other notes that fall on beats 1 and 3. I'm going to make my suspension resolve to an A, which is part of the chord. And I'm going to then highlight my A in green just so that we can see that my suspension resolves nicely. When we listen to it, listen out for that tension. Now I'm going to finish writing the rest of my melody. Let's hear the next 4 bars of my composition. I like it. So what I've got here is an 8-bar phrase that has 2 different ideas. I've got one idea for my first 4 bars and I've got a second quite contrasting idea for my second 4 bars. And this is called antecedent and consequent melodic structure. So it's kind of like you've got a question for the first 4 bars and an answer for the second 4 bars. Something that I didn't realize that I was doing until I've now looked at it is my first 4-bar phrase has a generally ascending melodic contour, kind of like a question, and then my second 4-bar phrase has a descending melodic contour, kind of like an answer. So I think whenever I'm composing, I like to have that sort of balance. Something goes up, something goes down. So now I'm going to play the whole thing all together so you can hear how the 2 different ideas work with each other. feels like it wants to lead somewhere. So I'm excited to kind of find out where I'm going to go with this. The last thing that I wanted to talk about was my use of sequences. I love sequences because Gershwin loves sequences and I love Gershwin. What I've got here, the first 2 bars of my second phrase, that's one idea, and then I've pitch shifted it down for the next 2 bars. So I've got the same idea, the same melodic contour, but I've just moved it down a tone so that I can have that feeling of continuity. Now I'm going to play it. This is the last time you're going to hear my composition, and I'm going to do a simple accompaniment with it just so you can hear how it all works in context. So let's recap the melody writing process. The first thing that we did today was think about the notes that were part of each chord and using those on the strong beats in our melody. The second thing that we did was thinking about using suspensions, where you've got a note that isn't part of the chord, that falls on a strong beat, but then it resolves nicely to a note that is part of the chord. The third thing that we did was think about antecedent and consequent melodic structure. So you've got 2 halves to one melody. And the very last thing that I love, because Gershwin does it, is the use of sequences, where you've got an idea that's repeated at a different pitch. Now we have come to the end of our lesson, so we have trivia. You get 1 point if you can tell me what movie soundtrack this is from. Good luck!